Alright, how's it going? So in this video, as the title would suggest, I'm going to go over my impressions of the new Battlefront 2 after about a week or two of playing, thanks to Origin Access and the Deluxe Edition. When I had originally wrote the script for this video, I had a little section about loot crates and the progression system, but now that the microtransactions are completely gone for the time being, I don't have to talk about that shitstorm, which is absolutely fantastic. I will quickly say that them completely removing in-game purchases on launch or just before launch day is a huge gesture on their part. I can only imagine how much money they just missed out on. This could be a great turning point for the future of gaming, especially from the gamer's perspective. But even if they bring back crystals just for cosmetics, I'd be completely fine with that, as I'm sure most people would. At least you can't buy your way through the progression system anymore. From here on in, I'll be focusing more on the gameplay side of things. Please keep in mind, these are my opinions. I could very well have differing ones to you, so please don't get angry if that is the case. Please remember, it is okay to have differing opinions, and we can have a civil conversation if that is the case. My opinions may also change as time goes on. Last thing before we get started, there really isn't any order to what I'm going to be talking about, other than I'll start with what I like and end with what I don't. The first thing that I like is a given, and is maybe the only thing that everyone agrees on, that being the visuals. This game looks stunning. Again, this is something that has been beat to death at this point, so I'm not going to linger on this topic. Next, I want to talk about the maps. They all feel quite different from one another, as they should since they are set on different planets. But not only do they feel different, they all play fairly differently too, which keeps things fresh. I especially like how you can play the same map multiple times and still find new details and find different ways to play it. As someone who gets bored pretty easy, I really like that. Another positive is the weapons and gunplay. They feel pretty good in my opinion. Pretty much each gun feels fun to use, and there really isn't much of a learning curve, especially if you're coming from another shooter game. One thing I really do enjoy is it feels like you can do well no matter what you're using. Sure, some blasters might be better than others, but the performance gap really isn't all that big. You can still use the basic weapons for each class and do well. I'm definitely a fan of the weapon balance so far. Next, I want to touch on star cards, and yes, this is actually in the positive section. The biggest takeaway I have about star cards is that when I get killed, I don't instantly think it was because the guy who killed me had better star cards. Even though they do technically give you advantages, one, the advantages really aren't that huge, and two, everybody has star cards, so everybody gets advantages. It seems to even out pretty well in my opinion. I think maybe each one should come with a disadvantage to go along with the advantage they provide, just to make it a little bit more interesting and maybe a bit more strategic. I'm not sure if the community as a whole would be a fan of that though, and that may be even a bit hard to balance, but that's my take on star cards at the moment. I'm definitely not a fan of star cards, but I definitely don't hate them either. They're just kind of meh to me. They're not the worst system I've ever seen. At least they give you something else to work towards unlocking above all else. Speaking of unlocks, there is quite a bit to work towards. Whether it's unlocking weapons, completing challenges, or grinding your way through arcade mode just to say you 100% completed it. I guess I can even group emotes and victory poses and stuff like that in this category now too. There's definitely a lot to work towards unlocking if that is your thing. The game modes are quite good as well in my opinion. Each is fun in its own way, and surprisingly I don't actually dislike any of them. The thing I like most here is that each game mode feels sort of refreshing when coming from another. Not sure I can really describe this well, but going from a chaotic session of Galactic Assault to a more calm Strike game mode, it feels nice. And then if Strike starts to feel a little bit boring, or you get a hankering for some chaos, you can jump right back into Galactic Assault. On top of that, Starfighter Assault feels like it could have been its own standalone game, which is pretty awesome. Overall, I really like the game modes we have at the moment. One thing I would love to see is a more Battlefield 1 operation style mode, where say you start in space, have to break through an enemy blockade to reach a planet's surface, and then have to play it out like Galactic Assault from there. I think that would be so much fun. Lastly, something I've heard quite a few complaints about is the lack of content at launch. I'm on the other side of the camp here, and I do not have a problem with the amount of content we have initially. In my first 10 hours of playtime, I had at most played each map anywhere from maybe 1 to 3 times. That's a long time to just make it through the map rotation, and that's without even mentioning the campaign or arcade modes. Sure, there may not be the most content in those two modes, but they will still keep you busy for quite some time. Pretty much what I'm saying is, I don't really know where the complaints about lack of content is coming from. It definitely seems fine to me. Sure, more content is always great, but I don't feel like there's a lack of it to begin with. And that's all without mentioning that new content is already on the way with the Last Jedi expansion. Alright, so moving on to the negatives now. One thing I dislike about the Galactic Assault game mode is the amount of heroes. By the middle to late stage of the game, there are just way too many running around. By that time, everyone is starting to get enough points to play as a hero, so you're pretty much stuck with facing 4 of them until the end. I think 4 heroes at once is too much. They can basically steamroll the entire opposing team themselves if they're half decent. At first, I didn't think it would be an issue, because both teams would have the same amount of heroes, and I thought it would hopefully even out. But it never really seems to work out that way, at least for me, and all the heroes end up feasting on all the people playing as standard classes. Sure, if your team works together to take out those heroes, it's alright, but teamwork is also something that can be a little bit hard to come by, unfortunately. A bit more on Galactic Assault. It can feel a little too chaotic sometimes, like to the point where I've used the term clusterfuck to describe it every now and then. I'm not saying it shouldn't be chaotic, it definitely should be. The chaos makes it feel like a true battle in the Star Wars universe, minus the kind of low player count that is. I just think the chaos can get a little too out of hand to the point where you start getting lost and have no idea what's going on anymore. Overall, I really do like the game mode, but of course, nothing comes without its flaws. I think matchmaking is also an area that needs to be improved. Getting put into completely empty lobbies is a common occurrence, both when looking for a game and even after a game ends, which is kind of weird. You'll kind of just get booted into an empty server. I'm sure that stuff will be sorted out with time though, so it's not the biggest deal. I also wish there was a way to choose at the very least which era you wanted to play, if not the map. The only thing about choosing specific maps I don't like is that there's bound to be 2 or 3 maps that most people prefer over the others, and those are going to be the only ones played. That would really suck. But at the same time, being at the mercy of matchmaking kind of sucks as well. For example, I've yet to play a game of Galactic Assault on either Kamino or Kashyyyk, the 2 maps I want to play the most. Matchmaking has kind of tortured me in that regard. Because of that, I would at least like to choose which era I want to play. I think that could work as a sort of middle ground. Just a while ago, I also would have mentioned the hero unlocks, but that's already been taken care of, thankfully. To finish things up, I'll just briefly touch on the campaign. The story is alright, but it's nothing great. I'd say the story was overall enjoyable though. It did feel a bit rushed. It just sort of felt like you jumped around a bit too much in between missions. I think it could have used 2 or 3 more missions just to smooth it out a bit, and that's a pretty common complaint I've seen. The objectives you had to complete within the missions, they were pretty fun. You get a pretty good mix of everything as well. You get tons of action, you get to play as multiple characters, decent starfighter missions. Overall, the action felt varied in a pretty good way. The cutscenes are pretty awesome in the campaign. It's incredible just how lifelike they managed to make some of the characters. The maps and really just everything in the campaign is visually stunning, as I'm sure you'd expect. Overall, I'm pretty pleased with the campaign, but I just wish there was a bit more of it. It just felt a little bit rushed. That's pretty much all I have for my first impressions. Let me know what you guys agree with and also disagree with. Please keep it civilized, guys. We are human beings, not fucking Tusken Raiders, okay? Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.